Peace, I'm Ivan the Talkative Uncle. Welcome to the 5th episode of the series Exploring the Bible, in which we have been delving into the complex and extremely important issue of divine revelation, exploring how different religious scriptures claim to be revelations from God and how we can objectively verify these claims. In previous episodes, we have explored the historical background and reliability of the Bible and the Quran. Today, we will turn our focus to another important religious scripture, the Book of Mormon, and see if it can withstand the test of historical testing standards we established earlier. The Book of Mormon opens by claiming it is a holy book comparable to the Bible, even going so far as to claim it is the most correct book and more correct than the Bible. Its origin story is quite unique. A young man named Joseph Smith Jr. allegedly had a vision from an angel, Moroni, in the 1800s. Moroni told him about a book written on golden plates that recorded the history of the early inhabitants of the continent. The record covered history from around 2000 BC, after the Tower of Babel, to around 400 AD, during which time groups such as the Jewry of the Middle East and Lehi's Jewish family allegedly established large civilizations on the American continent. Joseph Smith claimed to have translated this ancient record into English, and the Book of Mormon was eventually published in Palmyra, New York, in 1830. Since then, Joseph Smith and every subsequent prophet and apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS, have claimed that the Book of Mormon is a true and accurate history of ancient America. So how do we examine this claim? We will continue to apply the 3 core tests we used in our previous discussions of the Bible and the Quran. First, the depth and insight of the text. Does a divinely inspired text provide deep and timeless insights into human nature, God, and the meaning of existence? Second, accuracy and internal consistency. Does the text contain significant errors or contradictions, especially in its descriptions of historical, geographical, and scientific facts? Third, prophetic and supernatural elements. Does the text contain clear and later fulfilled prophecies or record supernatural events beyond human ability? The Book of Mormon claims to be God's word-for-word translation, which means that it should be absolutely correct and free of errors. Such a claim places a high demand on accuracy and consistency. When we look at the manuscript evidence for the Book of Mormon, we find a unique and troubling problem. The sources clearly indicate that no ancient manuscript copies of the Book of Mormon exist. In fact, the earliest documented Book of Mormon we have is its publication in 1830. This leaves a huge 1,400-year gap between the historical events it purports to record. The events described in the Book of Mormon allegedly end around 400 AD, but we don't see the first documented record of it until 1830. This begs the question, was the content of the book constructed in the 19th century? This is in stark contrast to the situation with the Bible. For the New Testament, we have over 24,000 extant manuscript copies, 230 of which date back to before 600 AD, many even predating the compilation of the Quran. The oldest fragments of the New Testament date back to 50 to 68 AD, possibly contemporary with the original author. The Dead Sea Scrolls of the Old Testament prove that its text existed in 125 BC and is almost identical to the Masoretic text of 916 AD, spanning more than 1,000 years. This also proves the high stability of the biblical text in thousands of years of inheritance. Therefore, judging from the manuscript evidence, the claim of the Book of Mormon faces severe challenges. Prior to the publication of the Book of Mormon in 1830, we have no known ancient documentary records that mention the people, places, or events described in the book. This is a disturbing historical silence. If, as the Book of Mormon claims, large civilizations such as the Jeremiahs and Nephite existed in ancient America, built vast cities, and fought wars involving tens or even millions of people, then there should have been extensive documentary evidence of these events during the time period. However, the source states, we have no documentary traces, and no texts are available until 1830. This complete lack of documentary evidence makes the Book of Mormon's claim to be an ancient historical record extremely challenging from the outset. The historical narrative of the Book of Mormon is very grand, describing the vast civilization, cities, wars, and unique plants, animals, and technology of ancient America. However, the evidence found by archaeology is very different from these descriptions. The Book of Mormon records the existence of the Jeremiah and Nephite empires, who were industrious peoples who built large cities and even used machines. However, the data clearly states that we have found no trace of it. Several archaeologists and anthropologists said that this is unthinkable, that any civilization that existed would have left many artifacts, and there is no case where a certain force was destroyed without leaving any evidence. The Book of Mormon mentions the names of more than 30 major cities, such as Nephi, Manti, Sahila, Sidon, and Fertility. However, no site can be identified as Nephi, and there is no evidence for Sahila. For example, the buildings in Palenque, Guatemala, were actually built centuries later than the events described in the Book of Mormon, so it cannot be Nephi. When a civilization claims to have existed for thousands of years and even can write, it leaves no historical traces, which is extremely far-fetched. One interviewee said it was absolutely impossible if a large city like Tiberias, described in the Book of Mormon, was conquered without leaving any evidence of buildings, artifacts, small objects, coins, etc. In addition, the Book of Mormon describes the existence of specific plants, animals, and technologies in ancient America. Animals, it mentions cows, bulls, donkeys, horses, goats, elephants, and bees. However, the source states that during the period claimed by the Book of Mormon, the American continent had no horses, elephants, cows, sheep, or goats at all. Bees were brought to America by Columbus in the 17th century. Stories about horse-riding warfare could not have happened in America because horses were not introduced until the arrival of Europeans in the 17th century. Plants, wheat and barley are mentioned in the book. But archaeologists say that no wheat or barley can be seen in ancient America. Instead, they found turkeys, llamas, dogs, corn, beans, and pumpkins. Metals and technology. The book describes the refining of various ores such as gold, silver, and copper, as well as weapons and armor made from steel and iron, and even metal coins as currency and writing on metal plates. However, archaeological evidence shows that there was no evidence of such metallurgical technology in the Americas at the time. No steel mill sites were found. The Maya did not use metal at all. Metal coins were not used anywhere in ancient America before the arrival of Europeans. So, where did all these Nephite coins, which were nearly 1,000 years old, go? The Book of Mormon records Hiramora as the site of 2 devastating battles. The Jeremies fought each other here, with 2 million people reportedly killed in one battle. Centuries later, the Lamanite annihilated the Nephite here, killing hundreds of thousands of people, at least 230,000. However, the source states that no archaeological evidence of any major battles has been found, no mass burial sites, human remains. Although the Book of Mormon mentions steel swords and chariots, archaeologists have only found stone tools. Even archaeologists from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS, have found nothing while excavating near Hiramora. The source states explicitly that the LDS Church does not excavate Hiramora because they know there is no evidence there, and excavation would only prove that their beliefs are false. The Book of Mormon claims that the Nephite built a temple like Solomon's in America. However, from a Jewish perspective, a temple could only be built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and building a temple anywhere else was utterly impossible. In addition, the Book of Mormon shows Lehi ordaining his sons as priests. However, according to the law of the Old Testament, all who serve in the temple must be descendants of Aaron. The ordination of non-Aaronites as priests is explicitly prohibited, yet the Book of Mormon claims to uphold the law of the Old Testament. This constitutes a serious contradiction in religious law. The Book of Mormon claims that Jesus Christ visited America around 34 AD after his resurrection and taught the Nephite and Lamanite. However, the source explicitly states that there is no evidence that Jesus visited America. Scholars have difficulty understanding why his visit to the New World has completely disappeared if there is so much archaeological and textual evidence to support Jesus' historic presence in Palestine. The source cites multiple scholars who argue that the Book of Mormon's geographical, archaeological, linguistic, and historical claims are seriously at odds with known evidence. Geography. The Book of Mormon's geographical descriptions have no real-world context and cannot be found on a map. This is why the LDS Church has no official position on the Book of Mormon's geographical locations, because the events simply did not take place anywhere. Linguistics. The Book of Mormon claims that the Nephite spoke a language called Reformed Egyptian. However, linguists say they have never heard of Reformed Egyptian because it is a made-up language that does not exist. There is also no evidence that the inhabitants of the ancient Americas ever wrote in Hebrew or Egyptian. Smithsonian Institution. It is worth noting that the Smithsonian Institution has never used the Book of Mormon as a guide for historical and archaeological research. Instead, they use several books of the Bible as guides for archaeological research. Thomas Stewart Ferguson, a prominent Mormon scholar and key figure in the New World Archaeological Foundation, he spent his life investing millions of dollars in the search for archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon in the Americas, but found nothing. He eventually bravely told the truth, discovered contradictions, and even lost his faith in religion because of it. He once said that there is no case in which all the coins of a civilization would disappear without leaving a trace. Taken together, scholars have concluded that the Book of Mormon is factually wrong. It describes the wrong plants, the wrong animals, the wrong technology, the wrong language, and the wrong culture. It is considered a 19th century religious novel whose historical basis is completely fabricated. In addition to this lack of external evidence, the Book of Mormon also has significant problems with its internal accuracy and consistency. The Book of Mormon claims to be an infallible text translated verbatim by Joseph Smith directly from the gold plates. However, the source states that there are textual differences between early and later versions. Since the first edition was published in 1830, there have been at least hundreds, and possibly more than 4,000 revisions to the current 1982 edition. For example, grammatical errors such as "they was angry with me" were corrected to "they were angry with me." These extensive textual revisions directly challenge the claim of a perfect translation. The Book of Mormon contains some anachronisms, where concepts or things appear in the text that should not have existed at the time it claims to have existed. For example, the word Christian or Christ is mentioned in the book hundreds of years before Jesus was born. However, the word Christ comes from Greek, and the group Christian did not exist until after Jesus' resurrection. This is impossible in the historical timeline. In the Book of Ether and the Book of Mormon, there is a description of a warrior being beheaded but still able to stand and try to breathe. The data points out that from a physiological point of view, this description is impossible. Without the central nervous system, a person cannot stand, and it is even more impossible to try to breathe without a head. This description that goes beyond the logic of reality also weakens the authenticity of the text. Certain passages in the Book of Mormon describe the skin color of the Lamanite as dark and dark because of their rebellion, while the skin color of the Nephite was white. The idea that skin color was associated with righteousness or rebellion frankly makes me laugh, the source said. It reflects 19th century racist views. If a text is divinely inspired, such strong ethnic prejudices would be considered wrong. Claims of prophecy in the Book of Mormon have also been called into question. The source mentions a failed prophecy about David Patton's mission. Joseph Smith had predicted that David Patton would become an apostle the following spring. However, Patton died in October 1838, less than 6 months after the prophecy was made. This error of such magnitude raises serious questions about the reliability of prophecies in the Book of Mormon. An examination of the manuscript, documentary, and archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon, as well as an analysis of its internal accuracy and consistency, has led to the conclusion that the Book of Mormon has significant deficiencies in historical verification. Manuscript evidence. There is a lack of ancient manuscripts, with the earliest text dating only to 1830, leaving a 1,400-year gap between the history it claims. Documentary evidence. No external documents prior to its publication mention the people, places, or events described in the Book of Mormon. Archaeological evidence. Neither large civilizations, cities, endemic plants and animals, metal technology, nor epic battles involving hundreds of thousands of people have been confirmed by archaeology. Even Mormon scholars have been unable to find supporting evidence. There is also no evidence for the claim that Jesus visited the Americas. Internal accuracy and consistency. There are numerous version discrepancies, anachronisms, such as mentioning Christians before Jesus' birth, physiological fallacies, and moral narratives that include racist views. Prophecies. There are also cases of failed prophecies recorded in the text. All of this poses a serious challenge to the Book of Mormon's claim to be an ancient historical record and divine revelation. Some scholars even bluntly say that the Book of Mormon is a 19th century religious novel. In contrast, the Bible has been extensively and continuously verified in terms of manuscripts, documents, and archaeological evidence. Archaeologists continue to discover new materials that confirm the accuracy of the biblical narrative. Its historical figures, places, and events are highly consistent with known historical and archaeological records, which allows the Bible to be considered a reliable historical document. Therefore, the conclusion of the data is that the Bible, not the Book of Mormon, can be trusted as an accurate and reliable historical document. For those who seek the truth, the results of this historical test provide a solid foundation for the establishment of personal faith, making faith not only subjective feelings, but also based on real history. Thank you for your support. I hope you can subscribe, turn on notifications, and share to support this channel to continue. To learn more, join my Patreon. There is a text version in the member area. Let us know God, think about faith, and live out Christ together. Goodbye.